Have you ever walked through a school at night? Not the kind of night where the lights are still on and a few teachers are finishing up paperwork. I'm talking about the real night, hours after everyone has gone home, when the halls are empty, the classrooms are locked, and the silence feels heavier than it should. Most people never get to experience that, but for custodians, it's part of the job. Every creak, every echo, every shadow belongs to them, and sometimes so does the fear. Schools are built for noise, students talking, lockers slamming, bells ringing. But when that noise is gone, something strange happens. The building doesn't rest, it waits. And in that waiting silence, things begin to move, things that shouldn't. Tonight, I want to take you inside those empty halls, into the places where ordinary janitors and custodians found themselves face to face with something they couldn't explain. These are not ghost stories told secondhand. These are the words of people who were there, who felt the weight of something watching them when no one else was around. 3 stories, 3 different schools, 3 nights where the silence broke into something much darker. First, we'll start in the basement of a small town school, where one custodian swore he wasn't alone. From there, we'll climb to a locked 3rd-floor classroom that breathed with something unseen. And finally, we'll step into a dark auditorium where whispers carried across the stage long after the curtain fell. So turn off the lights, put yourself in their shoes, and ask yourself, if you were the only one inside a school after midnight, would you finish your shift or would you run? Let's begin with the first story, the basement footsteps. I worked as a custodian at a middle school for almost 5 years. Most people assume the night shift is easy, just sweeping, mopping, and locking doors while the world sleeps. At first, I thought so too. In fact, in the early months, I actually enjoyed it. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when a place built for hundreds of kids suddenly becomes yours alone. The hallways that echo with shouts and laughter all day turn silent. The classrooms are frozen in time, desks lined up, whiteboards half scribbled with lessons, posters peeling slowly from the walls. But the longer I worked there, the more I realized that silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes silence has weight. Sometimes silence listens back. And nowhere was that silence heavier than in the basement. The basement wasn't part of our nightly rounds. It wasn't supposed to be. Most of the building's essentials, the classrooms, the gym, the offices, were upstairs. The basement was more like the school's graveyard. Old desks with chipped paint, boxes of forgotten textbooks, broken projectors, and metal filing cabinets that hadn't been touched in years. There were long hallways down there, painted in that same pale, hospital green, but time and dampness had turned the walls a sickly yellow. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly, and half of them didn't even work. The first time I went down there, another custodian laughed and told me, "Don't stay too long. People say the basement has a habit of keeping company." I chuckled nervously, brushed it off as a joke, but something about his tone stuck with me. For months, I avoided the place as much as possible. But one night, my supervisor radioed me. "We're short on folding chairs for tomorrow's assembly. Need you to bring some up from storage. You'll find them in the basement." I froze. For a second, I actually considered making up an excuse, but orders were orders. So, with a flashlight clipped to my belt and a knot in my stomach, I headed down. The metal stairs groaned with every step, as though warning me not to come further. When I reached the bottom, a damp chill wrapped around me. It smelled like wet concrete and old paper, the kind of smell you never forget once it gets in your nose. I turned down the hallway, my shoes squeaking faintly on the floor. The sound bounced back at me in unnatural ways, like the walls were throwing it around. Finally, I reached the storage room. Inside, metal chairs were stacked in uneven towers against the wall. I gripped one of the stacks and started dragging them out, muttering to myself, "Just get it done. 5 minutes, that's all." That's when I heard it. A sound from the hallway, not a creak, not a pipe, a dragging step, like a shoe scuffing slowly across the floor. I froze, My flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I pointed it at the doorway. Nothing, just the empty corridor stretching into shadows. I told myself it was the building settling, or maybe water pipes. Old buildings make noise all the time, but something deep inside me already knew this wasn't that. I stacked the chairs as quickly as I could. My hands shook so badly the metal clanged loudly, echoing far too long through the basement. Then, just as I bent to grab another, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door at the far end of the hallway was cracked open. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched it. All basement doors were locked unless we opened them, and I was the only one down here. I whispered, "Hello." My voice came out smaller than I expected. No answer, just silence pressing in on me. I turned back to the chairs, desperate to finish and get out, but when I returned to the stack, I froze again. The pile looked different, messier, as if someone had shifted them while I was gone. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed as many as I could carry, hugging the cold metal to my chest. As I turned toward the stairs, I heard it again. Shuffle, drag. This time, it came from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, flashlight beam slicing through the dark hallway. Nothing, just peeling paint and cracked doors. But I swear in that moment, the shadows looked too thick, like something was standing just outside the light. I took one step backward, then another. My breath echoed in my ears. The silence wasn't silent anymore, it pulsed heavy, alive. Then it happened. 3 loud bangs erupted from the basement door I had entered through. Boom, boom, boom. The metal rattled in its frame, shaking so violently dust fell from the ceiling. I nearly dropped the chairs. My body screamed at me to run, so I did. I bolted down the hallway, every step slamming against the floor. The sound of dragging footsteps followed me, closer now, as though whatever had been lurking finally decided to give chase. I bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, the metal railing slick under my sweaty palms. My lungs burned, my heart thrashed against my ribs. When I finally burst into the main hallway upstairs, I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my back to it, gasping. Silence again, dead heavy silence. But in that silence, I swear I could still hear faint scuffing, just on the other side of the door. From that night on, I never went down there alone again, if a supervisor told me to. I refused. I didn't care about discipline. No paycheck in the world was worth whatever was waiting in that basement. And here's the worst part. Months later, while cleaning upstairs, I heard it again. From behind the basement door, 3 hard bangs as if someone was trying to get out. Tell me, if you were in my shoes that night, standing in a dark basement hallway, hearing footsteps behind you, would you have kept working, or would you have run like I did? That was just the basement, but schools aren't only terrifying underground. Sometimes the scariest things wait above you, in the places no one visits anymore. Our next story takes us to a massive high school with 4 floors. And on the 3rd floor, abandoned classrooms, long empty hallways, and one room where the silence wasn't empty at all, it was breathing. I worked as a custodian at a huge high school. The building was so big it felt like a small city on its own. 4 floors, 2 gyms, a massive cafeteria, and endless hallways that twisted and turned until you could get lost if you weren't careful. At night, that size became a curse. During the day, the building was loud, alive and buzzing with footsteps and voices. But after midnight, it was as if the walls themselves had died, leaving only me to wander through the empty skeleton of what had once been full of life. I tried not to think about how alone I was. I'd turn on my portable radio, let some music play in my earpiece, and tell myself it was just another shift. Just floors to mop, trash to empty, windows to check. But every so often, the music wouldn't be enough to drown out the feeling that something was watching me from the end of a hallway. Most of the time, I could push through it, except when it came to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was different. Even other custodians admitted it. During the day, teachers barely used it anymore. Most of the classrooms had been converted into storage. Doors stayed locked, windows covered with dust, furniture stacked like forgotten skeletons. Walking up there was like stepping into a part of the school that time had abandoned. And when the sun went down, it became the one place I prayed I wouldn't have to work alone. One Friday night, though, I didn't have a choice. My partner had called in sick, and my supervisor trusted me enough to finish the shift by myself. I told myself it was fine. I'd done this before. But as the clock crept past midnight, I found myself dreading the moment I'd have to climb the stairs to that third floor. When I finally did, the air changed instantly. It was colder, heavier, as if the warmth from the lower floors couldn't climb this high. My footsteps echoed too sharply, bouncing back at me from the narrow hallway walls. I told myself, get it done, one hallway at a time. I began mopping, pushing the bucket carefully so the water didn't slosh too loudly. I tried to hum under my breath to break the silence. That's when I noticed it, something small but wrong. A door halfway down the hallway was open. I froze, mop still in hand. That door had been closed when I did my earlier sweep. It was standard routine to check every door before starting, and that one I knew for a fact had been locked. Maybe a teacher left it open, I whispered to myself, even though I knew the teachers hadn't been on this floor for weeks. Cautiously, I stepped forward. The door creaked wider as I pushed it open. Inside, the room looked like every other abandoned classroom, desks stacked against the walls, dust layering every surface, a couple of cardboard boxes piled in the corner. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then my eyes landed on one detail. One of the boxes had been dragged away from the wall. Its bottom scraped a dark line across the dusty floor, ending right in the center of the room. I frowned. That's weird. I knelt down, thinking maybe an animal had nudged it, but the box was too heavy for that. It looked as though someone had deliberately pulled it out. My skin prickled. I told myself not to overthink it. I slid the box back toward the wall, closed the classroom door firmly, and went back to my mop. But unease was already crawling through me. 10 minutes later, as I worked my way back down the hallway, I froze again. The same door was wide open, and the box I had pushed back. I could see it through the doorway, sitting once again in the middle of the room. My stomach dropped. I whispered louder this time, "Hello, who's there?" My words echoed off the empty walls. Silence answered me. I stepped into the classroom slowly, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in my grip. I scanned the corners. Nothing, just dust and shadows. But the box, it wasn't where I'd left it. And there were faint marks in the dust around it, as if it had been turned or rotated. I backed toward the door, trying to convince myself to leave. Just lock it and move on. But just before I pulled the door shut, I heard something. A sound so faint I almost thought I imagined it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing. It came from the back corner of the classroom, where the shadows were thickest. Every hair on my body stood up. My first instinct was to shine my flashlight there, to prove it was just the building making noise. But something in my gut told me I didn't want to see what was hiding in that corner. The breathing grew louder, deeper, more deliberate, like whoever, or whatever it was, wanted me to know they were there. I panicked, slammed the door shut, and stumbled into the hallway, chest heaving. For a long moment I just stood there, back pressed against the door, eyes darting left and right, waiting for something to follow me out. But nothing came. When I finally found the courage to call my supervisor, he told me to wait. 20 minutes later, he arrived, annoyed, holding his own flashlight. We searched the classroom together. Nothing. The box was back against the wall again, as though it had never been moved. "You're just tired," he said. "This place plays tricks on you if you let it." But I know what I heard. The breathing wasn't in my head. Weeks later, another custodian told me a story. Years ago, A student had tried to prank staff by hiding overnight in that very classroom. He scared a teacher so badly that they locked the room permanently after the incident. No one was supposed to use it again. That story explained the locks, maybe even the box, but it didn't explain the sound of someone breathing slowly and heavily when I was the only one there. To this day, I refuse to work the third floor alone, because no matter what anyone says, I'll never forget the sound of that breathing following me out into the hallway. If you opened a locked classroom door and heard slow, deliberate breathing in the dark, would you step inside to investigate or run for help? That was the third floor. Abandoned classrooms, silence broken by something that wasn't supposed to be there. But our next story takes us somewhere even larger, even emptier. Imagine being alone in a massive auditorium, with rows of seats staring down at you like hollow eyes, and shadows lingering behind curtains big enough to hide anything. Now imagine hearing whispers in that silence, whispers that call your name. Our third and final story is about an auditorium that refused to stay empty. For 2 years, I worked the night shift at a high school as a custodian. Every part of that job had its challenges, but nothing compared to the auditorium. If you've ever been in a school auditorium late at night, you know what I mean. It's not like walking through a hallway or cleaning a classroom. An auditorium is huge, so big it feels alive. The air carries your footsteps too loudly, and every little sound lingers like an echo that refuses to die. Shadows stretch across the stage curtains, and rows of empty seats stare at you like eyes. During the day, the place was perfectly normal, students rehearsing for plays, assemblies filling the seats, teachers giving announcements. But at night, when the lights were out and I was the only one there, it was different. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The first time I had to clean the auditorium alone, I laughed at myself for being nervous. I told myself it was just a big room, nothing more. But I quickly learned that the longer you stay in a place like that, the harder it is to believe you're really alone. One winter night, I started my shift earlier than usual. Snow was falling outside, soft and heavy, and the building was colder than normal. I wanted to get the auditorium out of the way first, so I grabbed my supplies and pushed the squeaky cart through the double doors. The second I stepped inside, the temperature dropped further. My breath fogged faintly in the air. I switched on the main lights, but only half of them worked, leaving long stretches of the balcony in shadow. I tried to ignore it. I set my broom against the first row of seats and began sweeping. The bristles scratched softly against the floor, the sound almost too loud in the emptiness. I was halfway down the aisle when I froze. On stage, something moved. A faint rustle, like someone brushing against the curtains. I stared, broom frozen mid-sweep. My heart pounded in my ears. For a long moment, nothing happened. The curtains hung still, the stage empty. Probably just the heating kicking in, I muttered to myself, though I knew the heat barely worked that winter. I forced myself back to work, sweeping row after row. But no matter where I was, I felt it, that prickle at the back of my neck, the undeniable sense of eyes on me. Then it came again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the wooden stage. My head snapped up. The lights above the stage flickered slightly. The sound stopped. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing too loudly. No answer. I climbed the steps to the stage, each one creaking beneath my weight. My flashlight beam cut across ropes, dust, and old props stacked in the corners. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I tried to shrug it off. Just finish the job, I told myself. But as I turned to step off the stage, another sound made me freeze in place. A whisper. So faint I thought I imagined it. I turned my head, scanning the auditorium. The whisper came again, this time clearer from the balcony above. It wasn't words I could understand, just a hushed, breathy sound. like someone leaning close, murmuring just out of reach. I raised my flashlight, shining it into the balcony. The beam landed on rows of empty seats, but for a split second I thought I saw something there. A shape, a figure sitting in the middle row. My heart skipped. I blinked. The beam wavered. The figure was gone. I stood frozen, gripping my flashlight so tightly my knuckles hurt. I told myself it was just a trick of the shadows, nothing more. But then, behind me, I heard it. My name, whispered directly into my ear. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. The stage was empty, the curtains still, the seats staring blankly back at me. My throat went dry. My chest heaved with shallow breaths. I wanted to leave right then, but my legs felt locked in place. That's when the footsteps began again, this time from the balcony, slow, packing back and forth. I shined my light there again, scanning every row, but nothing appeared. Still, the sound kept going. Heel to toe, steady, patient. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my broom, left it on the stage, and ran toward the side exit. My shoes slapped loudly against the wooden floor as I moved, and I swear with every step I took, the footsteps above matched me, keeping pace. By the time I burst through the exit door into the freezing night air, I was shaking so badly I could barely lock the door behind me. My hands fumbled with the keys, breath clouding in front of me. Finally, the lock clicked, and I stumbled back, staring at the silent building. The snow fell softly around me, the world outside calm and untouched. But inside, I knew it wasn't empty. Later, I told another custodian what had happened. His face went pale, and he told me something I wish I'd never heard. Years ago, a drama teacher had collapsed on that very stage during rehearsal. He died before anyone could get to him. Some said his spirit never left the auditorium, still watching, still whispering, still walking the stage at night. Maybe it was just a story. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark. But even now, I can still hear that whisper, calling my name when I was completely alone. And I'll never forget it. If you heard your own name whispered in an empty auditorium, would you stay to find out who, or what was calling, or would you run? And those are the 3 stories, 3 custodians, 3 schools, 3 nights that they will never forget. A basement where footsteps dragged through the dark. A classroom where invisible lungs filled the silence. And an auditorium where whispers called from the shadows. Most people think schools are empty when the day ends. But after midnight, those buildings come alive in ways that have nothing to do with students or teachers. The question is, are these just tricks of the imagination, our minds inventing terrors in the silence, or is there something else there, waiting for the halls to empty before showing itself? Either way, I'll leave you with this. If you ever find yourself walking alone through a school at night, surrounded by echoing hallways, locked classrooms, and dark stages, would you be brave enough to finish your shift, or would you run? Because sometimes the scariest part isn't what you hear or see. It's the thought that maybe, just maybe, you aren't alone.